Today we welcome Dr. Hanshermann Franke, who is Corporate Senior Vice President of R&D and member of the Global Leadership Team at LTS. Hanshermann, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to speak to you.
For those of you who don't know you, perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about your role at LTS.
Yeah, certainly. In my role, I oversee all sorts of R&D activities related to our, let's say, standard dosage forms that we develop and produce. That's the classical transdermal systems, the oral thin films, and our newest baby, so to say, the microarray patch program that opens up a complete new universe of molecules for us. There are also some part of tech transfer activities. My group is involved also. But I think that describes fairly well what I'm responsible for at LTS.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We'll talk a little more about the new baby in a while, if that's all right.
Sure.
It's fair to say that there's been a number of highlights in R&D during the LTS journey to date. What would be your key highlights that you'd pick out?
Yeah, certainly all the journey started with the nitroglycerol patch for LTS. This was the first one developed and commercialized, successfully commercialized. It is a medication in the cardiovascular disease area, followed then surely by the nicotine patch, which was really a landmark in smoking cessation. So this was really a very high commercial success for LTS at that time. The volume rocketed overnight, so to say. But so I think that's certainly a milestone for LTS. On the other hand, I think we should not forget about, for example, the hormone replacement therapy. That is something that carries also the success over the times for LTS. And there are two aspects. It's the hormone replacement therapy, and there's the contraceptive therapy that is meanwhile also accepted and a success for LTS. Buprenorphine pain therapy, let's say, highly ethical. Meanwhile, is standard in hospital, but also home care situations. And finally, not to forget about rivastigmine, an Alzheimer drug that was developed as a simple line extension, by the way, by the company. And it turned out that the transdermal route of administration was so much better in acceptance by the patients because of less side effects, that this really became one of the most prominent transdermal systems for LTS, but also across the world. I would like to close my personal, let's say, favorite listing with rotigotine. And the reason for it is very simple. It's really the first line development as a transdermal system. Rotigotine is not available orally, and the only alternative would have been an injection or an infusion. And certainly in home care situations, this is not something you like or you would accept on a long-term basis. So to develop rotigotine, a dopamine agonist in Parkinson disease, treatment as a transdermal system, make it feasible for the patients at home, was really something very exciting. It has been done together with LTS. And I think this is certainly something that LTS can be really proud of.
And it's made demonstrable changes to lots of people's lives worldwide. Absolutely, you've picked out quite a lot of highlights there, actually, and some of them are or most of them are being delivered through the transdermal patch. But of course, we shouldn't forget oral thin films, which is another technology area where LTS excels, and we must talk about the baby. So in terms of the other technology areas where you're perhaps less well known, particularly OTF and MAP, perhaps you could talk a little more about those.
Yeah, happy to do so. Yeah, for the oral thin films, LTS had a quite successful time in the 80s, 90s with some, let's say, what we call bioequivalent dosage forms for drugs that you typically take against cold or flu, or which helps you during the time of the flu season. This didn't really turn out as a, let's say, success, as a success that will endure over time. So we had some time to spend to find new, let's say, therapeutic approaches for using oral thin films. And it's pretty clear we would like to see an oral thin film always in the case when this really contributes to a better therapy. And that often happens if you have drugs that cannot be where you need, let's say, a rapid onset, but they cannot be taken orally, for example. So because the API sometimes will degrade through the gastrointestinal passage, and to have a dosage form that you can take without, for example, water, under the tongue, or just to place it at the cheek, to have it what we call the transmucosal absorption, makes the difference simply. So you can give it fairly easy. You don't need the long time, like for example with a transdermal, but you can give it, let's say, fairly easy, putting it into the mouth, under the tongue, as mentioned, at the cheek, and you get, let's say, a decent rapid onset of the drug action within a decent time, and you avoid any other complications by that. Another thing that we like to see in the future, it's still not there yet, is to have the oral vaccination, or what we call the oral thin film vaccination approach. There are some oral vaccines that you swallow and that will do the job even if they get into the gastrointestines. But most of the vaccines are not stable enough or not robust enough to survive this. So they have to be injected. And even with the oral thin film, we have another possibility here to again use the transmucosal route. So the drug will be absorbed by the mucosa and enter into the bloodstream. And this is certainly feasible with at least some vaccines that are for the moment given by injectables, or let's say by other means, parenteral means. So nevertheless, I would like to see in the future that we progress with our, let's say, approach to put vaccines into oral thin films and to allow the patient just to put it into the mouth and having the vaccine shot, let's say, given by that. So that would ease the situation for a lot of people who are afraid of all these needle sticks, of these penetration by needles, and who like to avoid this by simply omitting the vaccination. And this is certainly not let's say, a real solution for the patient. So we would like to offer here a convenient way for drugs that cannot be for drugs that need to be administered parenteral or by oral thin film. There, I have to add, there's certainly a limitation depending on the, for example, on the size of the molecule to be given transmucosally. And here we have our baby, the MAP, that can help us even to, let's say, administer those drugs.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about MAP. So perhaps start by explaining what MAP is, but also then a little bit about the therapy areas that you see microarray patches being optimized in.
Yeah, as I mentioned already, this is certainly also a pathway that we can use for vaccines. Maybe just a little bit about the technology to make it clear. There are little tiny needles that will enter into the skin, and because they are so tiny, you wouldn't realize it. There is no pain sensation at all. But by these tiny needles, we will overcome, or we are able to overcome, the outer barrier of the body, what is typically called the stratum corneum. So this horny shield of the body will be penetrated, and by that you simply deposit the drug where you would like to have it, in the epidermis. This is favorable in particular for vaccines, because the immunoactive cells like dendritic cells, for example, or Langerhans cells, they are in this area of, or this layer of the skin. So very preferred way of getting to, let's say, a very efficient and effective vaccination by this. The other thing that that MAP allows for us is to deliver large molecules, for example, beta interferon, which is used in multiple sclerosis treatment, that is typically given by also injectables. And we see also with the MAP the possibility that those large molecules will be administered in the future, and we have certain projects running on that already, will be administered by MAPs without pen sensation, without the typical hurdles you have with you need a doctor visit, you need to get this needle stitch, you get all this, let's say, inconvenient procedure with the doctor, and this is something where we would like to help.
Certainly, you've seen during the pandemic the rise in telemedicine and home care increasing exponentially. So I guess anything that supports that is a good move. You've talked a lot about the history, and the history is fascinating. And today, of course, you're developing new technologies for new therapy areas. But if we looked towards tomorrow, I guess we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and certainly in Germany right now, life is getting a little more difficult again. So vaccines will be one area of continued discovery in the future. But are there any other areas where R&D is looking to grasp the needle, excuse the pun, and look to develop new technologies or new therapy areas?
I think we mentioned already what the benefits of oral thin films and microneedle arrow patches can be. But there's also some potential still with the transdermals, for example, where we really try to get into, let's say, new field of indications. We have by our proprietary development program. So we deal with identifying suitable candidates, what we call the candidate selection. We do some first clinical studies with those candidates, and then we try to get together with a partner who is interested to complete the development, also with the later clinical phases. And in this regard, we look for new indications, and one indication we haven't been in so far is mental disorder, schizophrenia treatment, for example. And here we were able to get, let's say, one candidate into the first clinics, very promising results. And meanwhile, we have the first successful out-licensing of this program together with the big Chinese company. So yeah, there will be multiple ways how we can further enhance our technology. There's not only the technology alone, but there's also to make the technology available in other indications. And I think with the, let's say, the bunch of drug dosage forms we meanwhile have, we will be able to provide interesting new things. And think of one advantage again with the transdermals, that we have what I typically call the inbuilt interface to the body. And this is the only dosage form that you apply to the body that stays at the body. So you can imagine that this interface can be used for certain things. And one aspect or one element that we at the moment focus on is how can we maybe use information that we get from the body by so-called smart patches, get them transferred by near field communication or by RFID chip technology into, let's say, a health app, and then is distributed to the doctors. And this would, let's say, certainly go in line with the, let's say, current technology trends, no doubt about it. But here we would like to see that we really make use of the drug dosage form we have. There are also some other things possible, like, for example, opening a pouch where you have an OTF in, or where you have a transdermal in, and it sends automatically a signal to to a mobile, and then the doctor will know, oh, you take your medication at the right time, and maybe even more.
Certainly, that patient adherence circle needs to be closed, doesn't it? And lots of organisations are working very hard to improve patient adherence and conformance. So it's good to hear that we can do the same in transdermal. That was a really interesting look at what has been before and what is to come. I think it's fair to say that you still have some work to do, Hanshermann. So really interesting to talk to you once again. Thank you, really appreciate it. Dr. Hanshermann Franke, Corporate Senior VP of R&D and member of the Global Leadership Team, thank you for your time today. There will be more in this series of interviews with the LTS Leadership Team, so do look out for those. But for now, Hanshermann, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, and it has been a pleasure.